I'm going to restart my timer then. I'm going to get my full 5 here. Okay? Thanks. Thank you, committee, for the invitation to speak to you all today. On my flight here yesterday from Vancouver, I was listening to a podcast that some of you might listen to, Empire, and I would recommend it. They've started a new series on slavery. And one of the things they were talking about was it's a day of reckoning in Britain. A day of reckoning about how the wealth and the power of Britain is built on slavery and colonization. And in some ways, I was thinking about it about 35,000 feet flying over Treaty 4, I think, at the time. It's a day of reckoning here in Canada. It needs to be a day of reckoning the power and wealth that this nation is built on. And it's built on Indigenous lands. It's built on the wealth of Indigenous lands. It's built on displacing Indigenous people from their lands and taking that wealth. And I think it's important to understand that there's no lawful authority for that. Canada likes to talk of itself as a nation of rule of law. Where's the law that says that colonizers can show up and usurp someone else's land? Can take that wealth, to make the decisions about that land. That's not the rule of law. We talk about it in Canada as assertion of Crown sovereignty. This is a favorite phrase if you do a search on Canley for court decisions. Assertion of Crown sovereignty. From my view, that's a euphemism. That's a Canadian euphemism for the doctrine of discovery. That principle that colonizers can show up and take someone else's land. You've heard from those people here today. You hear from more of them. I think what happens, what needs to happen, is that we need to unpack that. If we're going to talk about reconciliation, what is that about? It can't be reconciliation based on a lie. The beginning has to be truth-telling. Truth-telling is vital. We heard last month from the Vatican renouncing the doctrine. From my perspective, there wasn't a lot of truth-telling there. I hope Canada can do better. I hope Parliament can do better at having a real open conversation about whose land is it? How did anyone else, how did a federal, provincial government get the right to extract the wealth from that land? I'm not just talking about non-treaty situations. I work for treaty nations all across the country, similar situation. I had the good fortune last week, I was invited out to the Mi'kmaq community of Listugush. We talked about this. Whose land is this? Hundreds of years of colonization. Let's move on to some truth-telling. And I think to start, that means really getting at this issue. If we're going to give land back, if we're going to move in that direction, it can't be from these old styles of comprehensive claims, which is what the federal government currently has. For Indigenous people that have entered into those, I can understand why. But at the end of the day, is there really a significant difference between that and what John A. Macdonald was doing with the national policy? It's about removing Indigenous people from their lands so non-Indigenous people can exploit them. That's what it's about. We need to move in a different direction, and the direction is we need to recognize Indigenous title. Recognize it. You don't need to go to court for that. The courts have been saying for years, you can figure this out amongst yourselves. The federal government needs to move in the direction of recognizing title, and then how are you going to implement that? Not through comprehensive claims with exchanges rights, actually recognizing and implementing. Thank you for your time. I'm sorry I'm 10 seconds over my 5 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. McIvor. We'll now proceed to our